Chapter 281 Proposal by Hydesgrain. Hearing Till behind him, Jason flinched and turned around only to see Till's serious expression. Seren stood next to him looking at Jason, not knowing what to think about his friend. Jason could see a trace of fear in Seren's eyes, and he couldn't really help but feel that his friendship with Seren was not as thick as he previously imagined because the gap between them seemed to widen. However, this thought was almost immediately disregarded when he heard Seren next to Till quietly lamenting, "So he never had to go all out against me." Smiling lightly, he looked at Gabriella and Mark, who indicated to him that they were fine and that he could go before he walked out of the infirmary with Till and Seren in front of him. They didn't say anything for several minutes before they entered a small room, which the two entered, only for Jason to inspect everything clearly with his mana eyes. There was nobody except Till and Seren inside the room, which was reassuring, but Jason also told himself that it was possible for others to have a complete mana concealment ability, as he already witnessed something like this from the untraceable drakes within the 4-star rift. As such, he carefully entered the small room with simple furniture inside, while Till and Seren already sat on the couch, waiting for him to come inside. Seeing Jason's acting too vigilant, Till said, "There is no need to be afraid of us. Rather than that, or more likely we want to help you if we can." Once Till said this, Jason's tension loosened up slightly as he approached the booth opposite Till and Seren, where he sat down. Looking at the two in front of him, Jason was unsure what they expected from him or if he should say something first when Till suddenly started. "To be honest, I'm shocked that you already formed a fortified soul conjunction with your soulbond, at such a young age and only slightly more than 6 months after your soul awakening. Furthermore, from the exoskeleton's appearance and the miniature parascores I saw before, I assume that they're the same and that it evolved into a powerful being at that, am I right? You are always good for a surprise, but I don't think that your decision to reveal your fortified soul conjunction in front of 2 sovereign ranks and old Drake was good. Let me be blunt with you. If you don't want to be forced into submission by the Drake family's harsh soul contract, there are only 3 ways for you to take. The first one would be that Shane appears in the next few hours, and takes you away, even if he has to use brute force. However, I don't know how much he recuperated from his injury, while I'm sure that old Drake should have a plan against this scenario, at least if his mind is not completely filled with his greed yet. The second way I can see is that you ask me and Seren for your help. It might create an unfavorable relationship with the Drake family, but the Drake family patriarch wouldn't dare to wage war against the Jiwire and Graal family at the same time, only because we took you in. However, for our clans to do something like this, you would have to be worth the effort, but I definitely think that you're worth it. Your combat prowess, mana aptitude, soul world, and mana eyes are exceptional. Furthermore, seeing that you were able to form a fortified soul conjunction in barely a few months, our clan's elders would definitely want to lure you in. There would only be one small issue, which would be that you would have to form a soul contract with both of our clans. Even if the clauses wouldn't shackle you down as with the Drake family's soul contract, they would still prevent you from attacking any of our family's descendants or even the possibility that you might collude with foreign races. If you can't cope with either of the previous 2 ways, the third one might sound stupid, but there are more than enough prodigies who would rather take the third path than being forced into submission, which wouldn't be better than being a slave. The third way you could take would be taking your own life, if everything else doesn't work out. Fleeing from the Drake family without anyone helping you is not something you can do, even less with 2 sovereign ranks chasing you. Ending his short speech, which was also an offer, Till started seriously inside Jason's eyes, waiting for an answer. Jason only gulped down his saliva, and even if he was sure that the first choice or way, how Till labeled it, was what he would take in the end, he felt gratitude towards Till, who offered him the second choice. However, in the end, Jason knew that he couldn't take the second choice, and that was not because he had to sign a soul contract. The reason for him to be unable to accept the contract Till stated would be the last clause he named without thinking much about it. Jason was called a Celestia halfling by the Shadow Walker, Wyriel some time ago, and if that was really the case, how could he not work together with foreign races as he himself was one in this case? With his current progress, it was impossible for him to stagnate at the lower cultivation ranks, which might allow him to leave Argos in the future. When that happened, he might have to work with other races together because Jason doubted that every single foreign race was bad. Even in the Ganassia and Deep-Sea Scion race, humanity labeled as terrifying monsters were filled with agony when one of their brethren died. As such, Jason would have a small problem if he still didn't hear anything from Shane. Fortunately enough, this already happened, and Jason looked at Till with sincerity gleaming in his eyes as he thanked him properly. Standing up, he even bowed to Till and also Seren, who looked at him astonished as he didn't expect to receive Jason's thanks, which embarrassed him. Till nodded his head, accepting Jason's decision, and he wished him good luck inwardly, when they changed their topic towards the next task they had to do. Because it was Seren's mission to choose his second soulbond, Till didn't intervene, and he only sat back after telling his disciple to start. Clearing his throat, Seren's expression turned serious and excited, as he simply said, "If you don't have anything else to do anymore, we should immediately depart to the shaft that brings us to the Mana vein." Hearing this, Till almost choked on the water he was drinking, and he could only shake his head as he hoped that Seren would explain more. However, thinking about it for a moment, the explanation could also be done later, once they entered the shaft. Smiling lightly, Jason thought about Seren's word for a moment, as he remembered something. "I need to stop at the Flay's house. There are still things I might need." Nodding his head, Seren didn't sound disappointed, and rather than that, he urged Till that they should depart as soon as possible. Sighing deeply, Till couldn't help but feel like a shuttle replacement, because Seren wanted him to bring them from one spot to another. Glaring at his disciple, Seren apologized immediately before they walked out of the arena. Meanwhile, Old Drake and the two sovereigns surveyed Jason for the whole time, and they didn't notice anything suspicious because they were unable to hear Till's words. Yet, they were excited after seeing that Jason was able to establish a fortified soul conjunction while being so young, which was definitely special and allowed him to reach extreme heights without being forced to have an extremely high mana attitude to be worth their effort to force him into submission. As such, they wanted to force Jason in signing the Drake family soul contract, only to be forcefully halted when Till and Seren appeared inside the infirmary right before they were about to act. Seeing that the heirs of two big families surrounded Jason, it was impossible for them to act as the two sovereign ranks suddenly felt something vibrating in their pockets. Astonished, they took out the emergency messenger crystal they received from the Drake family's headquarters. Answering the incoming call, the runes on the crystal manifested above them as they heard a pained voice, pleading for help, and the words, "Ice Dragon, through the rift, wreaks havoc." Chapter 282 Price for your betrayal by Hydesgrain. Hearing this, the two sovereign ranks immediately jumped up, as the quieter sovereign suddenly shouted, "Ian, is that you? What is going on? Hello. Where are you? We'll come immediately." However, the last thing Old Drake and the two sovereign ranks heard was a thunderous roar which revered through the messenger crystal, shaking the whole room, and the person on the other side of the messenger crystal crying out in pain before the signal broke off. Their bodies stiffened when they heard the thunderous roar, and the sovereign ranks were about to rush towards their headquarters when Old Drake suddenly said, "Don't. It could be a trap, and your current task is something else." Halting in their tracks, the two sovereign ranks stared at Old Drake as if he was insane, and they were about to disregard his words, only remembered the Drake family patriarch's words, telling them to remain on Asterix by any means. Gnashing their teeth, they didn't know what to do because it was obvious that something bad happened on Canir, where the Drake family's headquarters was situated. However, in the end, they still decided to disregard Old Drake's words because it was useless for them to remain on Asterix if the whole Drake family were to be annihilated by the Ice Dragon or whatever attacked them right now. Their current intel was minuscule, and the only thing they knew was something about an ice dragon whose roar they also heard, in addition to the rumored intel that the dragon seemed to have escaped through a rift, and that it wreaked havoc. With this, the two sovereigns who were always by their master's side concluded that it had to be the Drake family patriarch's Solbon's mother, searching for its hatchling. It was only weird that the dragon mother was able to venture through the rift because they knew that the rift had certain restrictions which should prevent the dragon mother from passing through it. However, after thinking for a moment, more than 20 years passed, and even if traveling through a restricted rift was life-threatening, mankind had yet to be explored what would happen if one were to disregard this restriction, by stepping through it without caring about one's own life. By the looks of it, the Ice Dragon Mother took 20 years to venture through the rift, driven by insanity to find her child, even if it meant that she might die. In the end, this was a dramatic story, but neither Old Drake nor the two sovereigns bothered about the Ice Dragon Mother's feelings, and it was more important to figure out what they could do to help the Drake family. Was it better to stay on Asterix to subdue a single new subordinate or to support the headquarters from their annihilation? It was not even worth considering the answer because it was obviously the latter, as the first option was only important if the clan continued to exist. As such, the two sovereigns were about to rush out of the room they were currently in with Old Drake standing further away when an eerie feeling encroached on the three. Suddenly, space twisted, and the two sovereigns disappeared from Old Drake's sight, whose eyes widened involuntarily, trying to comprehend what was about to happen. Goosebumps covered him, as he slowly started to comprehend what was going on when a small spatial portal emerged in front of him with two severed heads rolling out of the portal. Thick blood was still spilling out of the severed head, and the two sovereign ranks' facial expressions were filled with terror, as Old Drake grit his teeth, shouting out in wrath. "Shame!" Only then, the spatial portal enlarged with the two sovereign ranks' remaining bodies falling through it, only for an old man with ice-cold eyes to emerge afterward. With a bloodshot longsword in his hand, he smiled cruelly, as he said, "Hello, Drake, long time no see, you fucking bastard." Hearing this, Old Drake frowned, but rather than feeling enraged, a deep sensation of fear enveloped him, causing him to subconsciously retreat several steps, only to bump into the wall behind him. "Oh, are you afraid now, or is this also a disguise?" Shane asked, without showing any emotions, as he looked at the two dead sovereign ranks below him, sighing deeply. It's such a waste to kill such precious humans, but weren't they too weak for sovereigns? Shane didn't know why, but it was way too easy to kill the two sovereign ranks because he could just open a spatial tear to forcefully transport them to him, only to execute them with a Darkness Blade Crescent. However, it was obvious that the two dead corpses in front of him were sovereign ranks because he could clearly sense their prismarine crystal inside their mana core, even if it was crudely made, without taking their time to make a more refined prismarine crystal. Taking another glance at their mana core, Shane also noticed that their core seemed weird, as if it was barely being held together, which caused him to eye Old Drake curiously. The Drake family found a way to forcefully advance Lord rank to the sovereign rank. Good job, I guess. Unfortunately, it's useless. Smiling lightly, Shane couldn't help but feel that everything went a little bit out of control, as he saw Old Drake's thunderstruck expression. "What? Can't you speak anymore because you're too shocked to see me here?" Blinking with his eyes several times, Old Drake was barely able to open his mouth when he asked the most important question, whose answer he couldn't grasp over the last 2 minutes, because everything was just too much of a coincidence to be called one. "What exactly have you done?" Old Drake was shocked, and it was not only because Shane killed the two sovereign ranks just like that, without batting an eyelid, but rather that he was sure that the thunderous roar he heard through the messenger crystal belonged to a true dragon and not something faked by Shane, which was the most shocking for him. Did he do anything to help the ice dragon to find its hatchling, or how could these two incidents happen as if they were matched perfectly? Other than asking this himself, Old Drake was already acquainted with Shane's ice-cold gaze he saw in his eyes right now, which caused him to gulp down his saliva as he was reminded at the time Shane annihilated the whole Shaw family to rescue Dahlia. Is Jason that important for Shane, to go this far? Without being able to retreat further, Old Drake was forced to see Shane leaning down as he took the Sovereign's storage devices that were attached to their quantum bracelet and their spatial rings at the same time. Placing them in a small pouch, Shane averted his gaze towards old Drake once again before he approached him slowly. What have I done? Nothing special at all. There was just someone nice who told me where I can find the restricted rift where the Drake family patriarch got the unhatched ice dragon from. After that, I took a look and noticed something particular, which was quite helpful. In the end, the dragon mother took 20 years to venture through the rift, and the only issue was that she couldn't enter Argos. By removing the small issue she had to face, the ice dragon mother emerged out of the restricted rift. Isn't that amazing? The restrictions placed on the rifts can be cleared under certain conditions, but this is not important right now. Fortunately, the ice dragon mother was weakened, which allowed me to have a nice talk with her, and I think you can imagine the rest. I hope your clan and the whole family liked my present. Smiling cruelly at old Drake, he couldn't help but stutter in fear because he knew that Shane seemed to turn insane when someone tries to hurt his loved ones. Previously, old Drake thought that it was only Dahlia Shane would do everything to save, but apparently, Jason seemed to be just as important to Shane as Dahlia, which caused him to gulp down his saliva before he stuttered, "Why, you are insane. How dare you betray humanity? Do you even know how many innocent humans you'll kill with this?" However, Shane was completely unimpressed by old Drake's words. "Oh, the ice dragon won't attack anyone, except the Drake family, their headquarters, and whoever attacks her first. The sole contract I did is enough to reassure me that, but you don't even bother about innocent human lives. Why are you a hypocrite now?" Shane's smile widened as he continued, "Where is your confidence from before? Why don't you repeat the words you told Jason? Do you think I'm a joke? How dare you betray Dahlia and me after we have known each other for 2 centuries? Was this whole relationship worth nothing for you?" Halting his steps, Shane stood right in front of old Drake, who began to shiver involuntarily by the killing intent intertwined with Shane's mana fluctuations that suppressed him. "Didn't you know that there is a price to pay for betraying me?" Chapter 283 Two Choices by Hydesgrain. Meanwhile, Jason, Till, and Seren appeared at the Flays' home. Rushing inside the house, Jason immediately went towards his room, where he took his belongings that he stored there. Wearing his spatial ring, the conservatory necklace, and mana sphere bracelet, he immediately felt much safer than before. Leaving the house again, he approached Till and Seren, without knowing what was going on inside the Syro City's arena where old Drake, the 2 beheaded sovereign ranks, and Shane were inside. In the beginning, nobody inside the arena sensed something wrong, but when the dense killing intent that was intertwined with a massive amount of mana leaked from the small room, Shane and old Drake were inside. Everyone's body stiffened without being able to move even a single inch. While Jason, Till, and Seren entered the shaft that brought them to the mana vein, not knowing that something major happened, Shan's hand firmly grasped old Drake's neck, pressing him into the wall behind, which already began to show signs of breaking apart. Lifting him up, Shane's eyes were filled with the desire to kill old Drake, as he asked with a chilling voice, "Why did you even betray us at times like these? Aren't you digging your own grave like that? Was everything we've gone through over the last 200 years a lie?" What happened? Barely being able to breathe, old Drake almost began to laugh, if that would have been possible, after hearing what Shane said. Smirking lightly, old Drake tried to open his mouth, as he said, "Why, you are the real hypocrite. Are you just innocent or naive to think that you can save humanity by being kind to everyone like you were over the last 200 years? Didn't you learn what it brought you 50 years ago?" Gritting his teeth, Shane knew exactly what old Drake meant, and it was obviously the truth. Otherwise, both he and Dahlia wouldn't be forced to flee from Canea without anyone really trying to stand by their side. There were a few families that tried to help him somehow, but they would never dare to fight against an alliance of more than 10 big families which was established with the sole purpose of pursuing him and ending his life. However, in the end, he and Dahlia still survived, even if the last several dozen years could hardly be described as a free life. Nevertheless, this should have had nothing to do with old Drake's betrayal and tightening the grapes around his neck. Shane's eyes turned colder, as he said, even if I'm a hypocrite, this doesn't mean that you can just act however you please. It's not like Jason has anything to do with this if you have a problem with my mindset. Suddenly, Shane noticed a distinct gleaming in old Drake's eyes which seemed to overwhelm him, forcing himself to smile, even if he was unable to breathe, as he said with difficulties. You should be more than aware how precious Jason's talent is. With him, the Drake family would not only reign over Canir, but we could even fight against the foreign races, instead of being their underlings and fodder. That gave him enough reason to betray us. Hearing this, Shane was once again reminded about Jason's words, the last time they talked with each other over the messenger crystal. His disciple, with his tender age of 14 years, had to explain to them that mankind was not only on the bottom of the food chain but the same applied to the whole planet. Argos was only considered an infant planet next to an unimaginable number of other worlds that inhabit intelligent life. Even though their planet was at the bottom of the food chain, how should old Drake understand how weak mankind was if he only saw the small picture without knowing how insignificant they really were? Old Drake didn't even know that their planet was only one small planet in a universe with the possibility of millions of similar planets. Sighing, Shane's anger lessened as he was reminded about the Shadow Walker with his terrifying strength and that he was barely considered a prodigy from the younger generation. Loosening his firm grasp around old Drake, Shane pondered what he should do with old Drake because it was obvious that he couldn't be trusted anymore. Fuck. Gnashing his teeth, he was sure that if he were to disappear right now, everything would become even worse. Old Drake would be able to explain over multiple detours to avoid their already existing soul contract's punishment that he killed the two sovereigns in order to take Jason away. Jason was considered one of the most talented youths old Drake saw in his whole long life, and it was clear to Shane that old Drake wanted to help his family to soar even higher, even if he had to walk down the wrong path. There was not much for Shane to do, as he tried to find multiple ways out of his current situation, without causing the worst-case scenarios for him, Dahlia, and most importantly Jason. He and Dahlia were currently fine, without the need to venture out in order to become much stronger because their potential was mostly used up. Without a path to rejuvenate their whole body, or renew their cells completely to ignite more potential, Shane was sure that he could at most enter a higher rank with the help of a high amount of resources instead of solely absorbing mana to strengthen himself. To rely on resources was not something good, yet it was the only path he could take to become stronger, while Dahlia's potential was still high as she took better care of herself. Additionally, she also possessed an origin flame, preventing her potential to diminish too fast. Sighing deeply, Shane knew that there was no perfect way out of the current situation, except killing old Drake. If old Drake and the two sovereigns died, nobody would know who killed him, except the darkness mana that lingered around the severed sovereign rank heads. This drastically reduced the number of perpetrators because the number of people who could kill a forcefully advanced sovereign rank with a single sword strike could be counted with two hands. However, what was even more problematic for Shane was, if he let old Drake survive, even if they were in the same room, indicating that he was reluctant to kill old Drake. This would only mean that the perpetrator and old Drake were good acquaintances, and if someone were to conclude the facts, Shane would be found out. As such, killing old Drake was the best thing he could do, when he thought about something. Glaring at his old former friend, Shane coldly announced the two choices he could think of in order to prevent any disadvantages for Jason. There are two choices I can give you. The first one is obvious and I'll kill you immediately without causing too much pain. However, the second option will force you to sign an advanced contract, preventing you from doing anything against me, Dahlia, Jason, and everyone around him. You won't even be able to talk about them or think anything bad, as it will cause you unbearable pain. Furthermore, we will create a story, telling that the two beheaded sovereign ranks behind me heard the news about the Ice Dragon Mother and immediately rushed back, disregarding your instructions, like it was the case. However, they weren't killed and you don't know what happened with them. When someone masked appeared in front of you, subduing you, preventing you from talking or doing anything against the younger generation. I know what your and the two sovereigns' task was, and you will just say that you were forced to send all students that entered the top 50 of all 3 Big 3 tournament participants away, as exchange students at that. With this scenario, Jason's disappearance wouldn't be too obvious, even if it can't be hidden completely. Think carefully about what you choose. I only give you the second choice because we have known each other for more than 2 centuries. Staring straight into old Drake's eyes, Shane could visibly see how the old man racked his mind, as he tried to figure out what he should choose. Most people would think that the second option was much better, but with the advanced soul contract, he would be incapable of doing anything against the clauses stated in it at all. Furthermore, sending away 150 top students, even if it was only for the purpose of a short student exchange, was not only difficult but could also end disastrously with them remaining on the island or even Canir, where he would have to send them. There was also the Drake family patriarch's wrath he had to endure, and it would barely be any help that he was the Drake family's ancestor. In the end, the current patriarch was the person old Drake feared the most, and he wouldn't be able to endure his wrath, as he shivered violently. A deep sensation of fear could be seen gleaming in old Drake's eyes before his gaze turned firm, as he said, "Just kill me." Chapter 284 Rest in Peace. By Hydesgrain. Just kill me. Old Drake's gaze was firm, but Shane could see fear spreading through his whole body, and his legs began to shiver in fright. It would have been a lie to say that Shane didn't expect this, however, even if that was the case, he was still frustrated. Not only did old Drake betray both him and Dalir, but he also tried to force Jason into signing a soul contract with the Drake family that was known for having soul contracts with cruel and harsh clauses. If Jason were to sign such a contract, he would be shackled until he would die without being able to get out of the contract, as it not only bound him to a single individual like it was the case with normal soul contracts. Rather, he would become the whole Drake family clan's slave, with the sole priority being the person who contracted him. Thinking about this, Shane's wrath ignited once again, and even if old Drake was an old acquaintance, there were 2 things he would never accept as long as he was alive and able to retaliate. The first thing he couldn't accept was being betrayed, and the second was someone trying to hurt or scheme against his loved ones. Shane was still unsure if he had such feelings for Jason, but he was definitely attached to him and considered Jason already as his family, even if they weren't related by blood or overly close to each other. It was just a special feeling Shane had, and the desire to protect Jason from all evil. As such, he didn't want to see Jason being forced into submission by anyone and would do anything to help him. He knew that Jason didn't promise him anything per se, but Shane knew for sure that the young youth was exceptionally talented with a good personality. Giving old Drake the possibility to choose between 2 options was already the most Shane could do. He was generous enough and not known for being hesitant against his foes. Standing in front of old Drake, he couldn't help but sigh once again, as he lifted him from the ground where the old man slumped down due to the pressure coming from Shane's compressed killing intent that was intertwined with his mana. Holding old Drake in the air with one arm, he pierced out with his other hand, which firmly grasped his sword. Staring straight into old Drake's eyes that widened involuntarily, Shane only mumbled, "Rest in peace." Seeing his old acquaintance's eyes dimming with each second passing, it was impossible not to feel melancholic. They fought together against hundreds of foes, and Shane would have never thought that it might end like this. When old Drake's eyes turned lifeless, Shane retraced his sword before he stored it away inside his spatial ring, to let old Drake's dead body lean against the wall behind him. Closing his lifeless eyes, Shane only wished that their paths wouldn't have crossed if something like this could be avoided. Reminded about their past, where they took missions together and lived a more peaceful life, Shane couldn't help but think that mankind would have to overcome many perilous situations in the next several years, because the number of accidents increased by several times over the last few years, where he hid from everyone. Is it finally time to go all in? Shane asked himself, thinking about Jason's talent. His gaze became as he averted his attention from old Drake, once he picked up his spatial ring and storage device. he only did so because it might slightly avert the Drake family's attention if they were to investigate old Drake's death. After turning around, he noticed the two beheaded sovereign ranks in front of him, and Shane began to wonder how exactly they forcefully advanced to the sovereign rank, as their combat prowess was much lower than what a normal sovereign would normally reach, even after one barely broke through. Sighing deeply, he had to dispose of the evidence. Thus, he stored the sovereign corpses inside his spatial ring, before he shattered the ground below him, where one could see blood sprinkled on it. Shane used his spatial ability and spatial ring together in order to store everything that was in touch with the sovereign rank's blood away. Once he cleared the crime scene, Shane let go of the remaining marble stones and other materials the ground was made of, that fell towards the lower floor, where they smashed into the ground. Seeing this, he once again scanned through the whole room in order to figure out if there was anything he had to do, except disposing of the sovereign corpses to make it look like they left old Drake to help out at the Drake family headquarters, where the Ice Dragon Mother was probably still wreaking havoc. His plan was not perfect, but definitely better than nothing, considering that he acted rashly, led by his emotions. Most people would think that he was too crude, harsh, or even a monster, but after the mana breakout, Argos changed essentially, and his decisiveness and other cruel traits were important to survive. Centuries ago, Shane was also young and naive, only to see his whole clan being eradicated without anyone helping him or his family. Rather than that, the surrounding families looked at everything with satisfaction in their eyes, as if they loved to see their strongest rival being annihilated. Through this, Shane was driven out of their territory while the other families started a war to figure out who has the right to annex the destroyed Blair clan's lands, once they took care of the high-ranked beast that continued to wreak havoc until its last breath. At that time, tens of thousands of humans had been killed by the beast, and it was only after a long time that the alliance of big families around the Blair clan territory acted. Witnessing this changed Shane's behavior completely, and he became more rational and cold-hearted towards others, with only a few exceptions. One of the exceptions was old Drake, who he killed. Knowing that he betrayed him only to get his hands on Jason because of his talent and special trait, Shane could only shake his head as he opened a spatial portal in front of him to disappear from the crime scene, after taking another glance at old Drake's dead body that leaned against the cracked wall. As Shane vanished, the killing intent intertwined with his mana also dissipated, releasing everyone inside the arena from the suppression. Being able to breathe more freely again, everyone was glad to have survived the terrifying mana fluctuations that suppressed and would have almost killed all humans inside the arena below the Grandmagus rank, if the mana suppression had been focused on them. The Flays were also shocked, sitting inside the infirmary, with goosebumps covering their whole body, as they looked at each other. What was that? Malia asked, still not sure how she survived, as she looked at her parents who didn't know what was going on, as they noticed that Greg opened his eyes. Looking towards the ceiling, Greg couldn't help but feel empty inside as he mumbled, "Let's meet again, Jason." Hearing this, the others were shocked, and their expression turned into utter confusion, not knowing what Greg meant with his words. Greg was also unsure why he felt that he wouldn't be able to meet Jason for a long time, but being woken up by the killing intent intertwined with somewhat familiar mana fluctuations led him to understand something important. The whole day was already extremely chaotic, but the old man who gave him a piece of paper, telling him to give it to Jason, was currently the most apparent in his mind. And comparing the concealed, almost negligible mana fluctuations radiating from the old man he saw to the killing intent intertwined mana that awoke him, Greg knew that these two were the same. Concluding everything together, Greg assumed that the old man he met was the mysterious beast creator who accepted Jason as a disciple. Releasing such terrifying mana fluctuations indicated several things, with one of them being that Jason's master was at an extremely powerful. Meanwhile, another fact Greg could tell from the suddenly released killing intent intertwined in mana was that Jason's master was extremely enraged because of something, leading him to think that something must have gone wrong. Hoping that Jason was fine, Greg wanted to stand up and message Jason, only to figure out that he was unable to move a single inch. Noticing this, Gabriella completely forgot the killing intent that infiltrated her whole body a short while ago as she jumped up, to assure her son that everything would be fine. Don't be afraid. You just exceeded your physical limit and overexerted your mana. You won't be able to move for a few days, but afterwards, there won't be an issue. Barely seeing his mother from the corner of his eyes, Greg couldn't help but feel sad, as he forced himself to ask. Jason already disappeared, am I right? Chapter 285 Mana Vein by Hydesgrain. Hearing Greg's words, Malia wanted to reassure her brother that he only sorted out his things with his friend, Seren, and nothing else. However, after seeing sadness gleaming in Greg's eyes, she couldn't say so as she suddenly asked herself if Jason would even return before they would separate. Will he come back? He only went out with his friend. Mumbling this, Gabriella and Mark also felt that their paths already separated and that it was unlikely to meet Jason for a long time, even if they were unsure why exactly both felt like this. Nobody said anything and the whole infirmary turned quiet when they heard a sudden announcement. There has been a crime inside the arena. Nobody is allowed to leave Cryo City's arena for the time being. The guards are eligible to use violence against everyone misbehaving or violating the given orders. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Hearing this, everyone was shocked, but thinking about the killing intent intertwined with mana, it was plausible that something out of ordinary happened. It was illogical that someone released such terrifying mana fluctuations solely to drink coffee with someone else. A few minutes earlier, Max Drake was surrounded by several high-ranked guards still pondering about his ancestor's words, how he acted while talking to Jason, and he didn't know what to think about all of that. Wasn't that too much? He thought, thinking that it was fine to ask someone to sign a soul contract as long as the other side agreed to it. However, forcing Jason into signing a soul contract that was similar to enslaving him, and threatening him to die if he were to reject their offer was not something he imagined to happen in their territory. He only wanted to observe the Big Three tournament and fight against Seren and Jason, who he felt more comfortable around after they survived the 3 foreign envoys' arrival in Syro City. Suddenly, the whole arena shock before it was completely enveloped in killing intent intertwined in mana, suppressing him completely. Barely being able to look up, he noticed that not even his Grandmagus-ranked guards were able to stand firmly on the ground. Max's eyes widened and he wanted to fight against the pressure, only to notice that he was powerless against it, forcing him to bear with it like everyone else. Unsure what exactly was going on, he thought that it might either be a sudden foreign race attack, or someone from a different big clan trying to scare Asterix citizens. However, knowing that 2 sovereign ranks were on Asterix, Max was still able to remain calm, thinking that everything would end soon. At least that was what he hoped for when he suddenly sensed a bad premonition emerging in his mind. Max was unsure what exactly was going on, but everything that happened during the last few days seemed to be too much of a coincidence. Not only did old Drake's behavior change, but his father also sent 2 of his closest subordinates with him to Asterix, which was also weird. An uncomfortable feeling enveloped him and he could only hope that his premonition was wrong. Several minutes passed until the pressure around everyone inside the arena disappeared as if it never existed. However, instead of sighing in relief, Max forced himself to stand up as he rushed towards the office he was previously at with old Drake, the Sovereigns, Till, and the others. A few guards followed him with heavy steps, unsure what the young master wanted to do right now and why exactly he acted so weird. As they sensed something weird from the room, Max was about to go in. Instinctively unsheathing their weapons, the guards followed Max inside the room, only to notice a large hole in the ground before them when they noticed the young master's shocked expression, as he slumped to the ground, whimpering, "No. No." The guards immediately figured out that something was wrong and averted the gaze from Max and the large hole in the middle of the room, as they found old Drake's dead body leaning against a cracked wall. Their eyes widened and the guards immediately jumped above the hole to figure out what was going on, as they noticed a deep cut in his abdomen, made by a sharp weapon. Blood was still spilling out of it, slowly forming a puddle below old Drake's dead body. Gulping, they didn't know what to do, and only shock was apparent in their mind as one of the guards subconsciously muttered, "He is dead." Turning around, they only noticed Max trying to stand up, with shivering legs as tears streamed down his cheeks. Jumping above the hole, he slowly approached old Drake, lifting his trembling hand to touch his ancestor's cold face. Gritting his teeth, Max could hardly contain himself, and the stream of tears didn't cease for a long time, when he turned towards one guard, instructing him to immediately seal the arena. Why did this happen? Max asked himself repeatedly, and he couldn't even think clearly as his question changed fundamentally. His expression twisted, and he furiously growled out, "WHO did this." Old Drake was the only one in his family Max really liked except his mother because he was kind and caring towards him. He never pressured him to become stronger, and it was extremely shocking to see that he had been murdered. Just like that, his life ended, and Max was unable to comprehend why someone would do something like that to old Drake. Despair, wrath, and agony filled Max's entire being, and he was unable to hold anything back as his blue eyes turned bloodshot, when he released all emotions that accumulated within him. He promised himself to find his ancestor's murderer, even if he had to become one himself. Meanwhile, Jason, Till, and Seren were already on their way towards the mana vein, not knowing what happened on the surface, as Seren explained to Jason everything he had to know. "I already told you that we have a pact with the Earth Dragons and that I can choose one of the 3 eggs to form my soulbond contract with, right?" Nodding his head, Jason was already aware of this fact, even if he was still unable to fully understand if the Earth Dragons had a backbone or if their pride was worthless. "Okay, what else should you know? Even if we formed a pact with the Earth Dragons, they don't really adore humans, which is not something surprising. Just don't bother them too much and everything should be fine. Other than that, you should also know that only the big families are allowed to form a soulbond contract with the Earth Dragons. This means that even if one of the Earth Dragon eggs wants to form a soulbond with you, you're not allowed to do so, otherwise, the other big families might start acting. In that case, it's not unlikely that other big families would force you into submission, and as you should know, that is not something anyone wants, or am I wrong? In the end, there is not really much you have to do, and it would be great if you would just tell me which one of the 2 Earth Dragon eggs with higher mana fluctuations I should choose." Seren seemed to be extremely happy, and he was impatiently waiting to finally arrive at the mana vein, which Jason's mana eyes clearly perceived. His eyes still hurt when he looked directly into the mana vein, but it was less painful than several months ago when he and the Flays arrived in Syro City. Right now Jason could already look into the mana vein, and his eyes didn't start bleeding as he started to absorb the mana around him slowly, which became denser and purer with each meter they came closer to the mana vein. His eyes began to gleam brightly, and instead of absorbing everything inside his mana core, Jason decided to let the passive mana gathering technique within his sub-area absorb mana inside his mana core, while he actively absorbed mana into his eyes that seemed to have unlimited storage space for mana. If he had to estimate it, Jason was sure that he could break through multiple levels in a month, and it wouldn't even be unlikely to assume that he might enter the expert rank in only 1 month with the sheer mass of dense and pure mana he perceived around the outer parts of the mana vein. Seren was still chatting as if he hadn't talked with anyone for several centuries and that he was now in dire need of someone to talk to, but neither Jason nor Till really listened to him. While Jason was fully concentrated on his surrounding, and everything he could perceive with his mana eyes, Till's train of thoughts was completely different as he asked himself how he could help Jason to prevent old Drake or someone else to enslave him with a harsh soul contract, if Shane wouldn't appear to rescue his disciple. However, seeing Jason's calm expression, Till thought that the youth and Shane are probably capable enough to solve everything alone, without his help. Thinking about this caused him to smile lightly, as it would truly be a waste to force Jason into submission, shackling down his potential. Almost 3 hours passed when they arrived at the bottom of the shaft, and only now was Jason able to see how devastating the mana vein truly was, as his eyes longed for the astronomical mass of mana in front of him. Chapter 286 Slumber by Hydesgrain. Jason was neither able to see through the mana vein nor could he estimate how large the whole vein was. However, one thing was for sure. He wouldn't even be able to absorb the whole mana vein with his current absorption speed, even if he had several hundred years. Furthermore, the mana density and purity were shocking, which allowed Jason's absorption and refining speed to increase by a small margin. Looking around in shock, he couldn't help but passively absorb mana without wasting a single second. Jason's eyes itched and his instincts told him that he had to absorb as much mana as possible inside his eyes if it was possible, and there was not really something preventing him to do so. Even if his mana core could be filled by a small margin, Jason felt that it was more important to absorb as much pure mana inside his eyes, which he started to initiate as he followed Till and Seren. Seren was extremely excited and barely able to suppress his emotions, which Till and Jason noticed, and both couldn't help but smile, even if Till's train of thoughts still lingered around Jason, even if it was highly likely that nothing bad would happen. In the end, he couldn't help but hope that Shane would come and rescue his disciple, but if the worst case occurred, he would have to do something, otherwise, not only one of the most talented prodigies he ever saw would be forced into submission by the Drake family, but it would also destroy the Eliquirium between all big families once Jason would be nurtured, which was not something Till wanted. If the latter happened, Jason would be a target for all big families and it was not unlikely to be assassinated or openly murdered. Till was not even sure why exactly the other big families acted so hostile against prodigies that signed a soul contract with any other big family, but there seemed to be something important about it. The only reasons he could imagine were that it destroyed the Eliquirium between all big families on Canir, but on the other side, Till thought that a talented prodigy might even be able to change the tides against the foreign races, which was the reason for him to be so confused. In the end, the balance between all big families was exactly what held mankind back. It also allowed the foreign races to suppress the big family without any problems. If they worked together and nurtured the most talented youth of all families, they could soar much higher and maybe even start to revolt against the foreign races. Sighing deeply, he looked at Jason, who looked interested as he noticed that the golden-eyed youth absorbed the mana in his surrounding greedily. However, instead of annexing the mana normal with a whole circulation through his body before it would enter his mana core, Jason simply absorbed the mana inside his eyes, which Till could only eye weirdly. Even if he is talented, Jason is still a weirdo and a mystery. Jason meanwhile didn't notice that Till stared at him, and neither did he perceive Seren's behavior because he solely focused on his surroundings that were filled with several dozen outlines. These outlines were enveloped in all kinds of colors, telling him that there was something valuable all around him. While he presumed most of these enveloped outlines to be ingredients or other magical treasures, there were also a few smaller and larger outlines, moving around with a shocking speed. Somehow, Jason felt both comfortable and uncomfortable in the narrow tunnel they currently walking along in order to enter the Earth Dragon's territory, as he perceived several dense purple colors in front of him, with a handful of faint blue enveloped beings further away. Estimating them to be either extremely old Earth Dragons that broke into the Lord or other Earth Dragons that had the potential to barely enter the Lord rank, Jason couldn't help but feel that some Earth Dragons were truly powerful. However, this was not what caused him to be truly shocked and uncomfortable, because he had Till Grile next to him, who was already at the Lord stage at his age of barely 56 years. To be able to enter the Lord rank at such a young age, Till required lots of resources and a terrifying talent. Thus, Jason didn't think that the Earth Dragons below the surface would be a huge problem for him to handle. Other than that, the Earth Dragons had a pact with the big families, and as long as nobody breached it, everything would be fine. To break their pact, all Earth Dragons that lived around there would be severely injured, making it impossible for them to fight against Till head-on. Nevertheless, it was better to be careful than too arrogant, which Jason already noticed firsthand, several times. As such, he continued to look around carefully, when his eyes widened slightly as his jaw dropped to the ground. Only now, with his mana eyes being supplied by dense, pure mana, could he gaze inside the mana vein. It was barely a tiny gap he could see, but there was a terrifying, dense, yet suppressed azure color flickering inside the mana vein with a trace of silver mixed in between. What the hell is that? He thought, shocked, halting his steps to solely focus on the existence within the mana vein. However, the more he looked at the mana vein, the more painful it became, and Jason could only avert his gaze after several moments when he saw several dark blue hues at the mana vein junctions far away from azure, silver-colored being. Till noticed that Jason stopped walking, and seeing his expression, he was immediately alarmed as he was aware that Jason's mana eyes were extremely terrifying. What is going on, Jason? Can you see something odd? Shaking his head by Till's question in order to get back to his senses, he smiled lightly, as he asked, "The mana vein has existed since the mana outbreak, right? Has there ever been a problem with it?" Hearing this, Till pondered for a moment, as he shook his head, denying his latter question. "As far as I know, the mana vein existed since the mana outbreak, but there has never been an issue. Rather than that, it has always been extremely beneficial for everyone on Asterix because it allowed Syro City's citizens to absorb much more mana than other islands' capitals because everyone is forced to use the magic dome. Thanks to the mana vein, Asterix's strongest youngest generation is always gathered around Syro City, which is an additional perk for the Drake family. The sole disadvantages are beast tides, like the Goblin Siege that happened not long ago, if we were to disregard the foreign races that could appear everywhere just like that, which happened often enough." Listening carefully, Jason deducted that nobody knew about the terrifying existence which most likely hibernated inside the mana vein for 300 years. He never saw such colors from a living being or something manufactured, and the only rough assumption Jason could do was that the azure color belonged to the monarch rank, which was roughly comparable to the sovereign rank, while the silver color was something he couldn't get the hang on. Is that the color for the potential above the monarch, sovereign rank? He wondered and thought about it for a moment. It had to be the case, which shocked him. If the hibernating beast were to wake up, not only Asterix's citizen but humanity altogether would perish. Chapter 287, Ferocious by Hydesgrain. Thinking that the hibernating beast could wake up every moment, Jason couldn't help but gulp down his saliva before he regained his senses. It probably won't wake up just like that, otherwise, it would have already because of the Goblin King or multiple appearances from the foreign races. Reassuring himself, Jason was able to calm down, as he just told Till that there was nothing major to worry about and that he only saw a few strong mana fluctuations which astonished him. Hearing this, Till was unsure whether to laugh or cry because he didn't know how strong the strong mana fluctuations Jason talked about were. "I doubt that Jason sees my mana fluctuation as strong since he perceived the fluctuations from sovereign ranks and the foreign races. Doesn't that mean that he saw mana fluctuations on par with a sovereign rank?" With this conclusion, Till couldn't help but gulp as his gaze followed Jason, who remained calm as if nothing happened. Seeing this, he could only think that his conclusion was wrong, otherwise, the young youth in front of him wouldn't be able to remain so calm. Telling himself this inwardly, Till was able to maintain a neutral expression, as Seren called him over because he was already far ahead waiting impatiently. Walking towards Seren, Jason was still thinking about the hibernating beast, trying to distract himself by further increasing his mana absorption. His eyes seemed like a black hole, accepting mana without limit, and Jason felt that he might even be able to absorb the whole mana vein inside his eyes if he only had enough time. It sounded ridiculous to himself, but somehow, he was sure that it might work, and he even felt as if his eyes wanted him to do exactly that. However, he disregarded this desire within him, and silently followed Till and Seren, when they approached a 30-meter-tall black door with several hundred complicated runes inscribed on it. Seeing the runes, Jason could only name a few of them, while he never saw such complex conjunctions between runes inside the books he read, as his curiosity was ignited. Unfortunately, before he could even memorize a single rune, the large door was already pushed open by Till, with an odd odor permeating the air almost immediately. What is that? Jason began to wonder, and he found the odor he smelled familiar yet completely strange. Pondering about it, he couldn't really figure out what it was, except that it was something he already smelled somewhere else. Suddenly he saw Seren and even Till taking out high-quality gas masks, and Jason almost immediately figured out what exactly the odd odor was. They use sedating poison to calm down the earth dragons. Feeling disgusted, Jason was unsure what to think about that. He already understood that it was necessary to contract soul bonds in order to survive on Argos after the Mana outbreak, and he could also accept the Beast Pagoda because they seemed to care about the beasts they sold to humans. Otherwise, Jason wouldn't have been questioned so much about his reason to purchase a newly hatched miniature Parasaurs, but permanently using sedating poison to calm down the earth dragons was not something one would normally do with the others after making a deal. Furthermore, he doubted that the sedating poison was strong enough to permanently sedate the earth dragons, who most likely already established a certain degree of poison resistance after more than a century passed. Shaking his head, he only saw Seren holding out a gas mask to him, but Jason only glanced at his friend whose whole head was covered as he shook his head. Using his Black Origin flame, he covered his lower part of the head with the Black Origin flame, ordering it to purify the air when he inhaled it. Normally flames would use up most oxygen before he could even inhale it, but his Black Origin flame supplied itself thanks to the soul energy, allowing it to have a small mana pool within it, while Jason's mana was the second mana supply. It didn't even need any oxygen, to begin with, thanks to its special composition, otherwise, it would have already been extinguished when it was enveloped in the black crystalline layer before Jason bound it. Seeing that Jason didn't want to take the mask, Seren only shrugged his shoulder, while his eyes seemed to widen slightly, as Jason's appearance changed to somewhat evil-looking. The lower part of his head was covered by a thin black flame that seemed to be extremely stable, while his golden eyes shone brightly. The Black Origin flame didn't even flicker, and one would need to look multiple times to figure out that it was a burning flame covering him. Jason didn't think of himself as a saint or even something close to that, but he didn't like how the big families treated some humans that were weaker than him, while the same could be applied for beasts, even those at the peak Guardian rank, which almost caused him to chuckle. Treating other humans and all kinds of beasts as livestock, huh? If they only know how the foreign races think of humanity. Wait, don't the big families know that already? Thinking about this, Jason felt much better, and he didn't know why, but he found that most big families were rotten to the core as he noticed that Till also looked like he was uncomfortable when he looked at Jason. Sighing, he couldn't help but say, "Jason, I know what you think, and there is no excuse for any of that, but mankind would do everything to survive. Anyone would try every single way to survive, or am I wrong? In the end, all beasts except those that abound are dangerous. If we were to lower our guard, who could reassure us that we would survive? In the wild zones, beasts and humans kill each other on a daily basis, and you know that. Don't try to think too hard about the world's unfairness, alright? It's not worth the effort." Hearing Till's words, Seren looked at his teacher for a moment, before he continued to walk ahead, leaving Jason alone, who was pondering over Till's words. Am I a hypocrite then? Jason suddenly began to wonder, but he still found it wrong to torture the earth dragons if it was not necessary, which however seemed to be the case, according to Till's words. But even so, this doesn't necessarily mean that it was the truth. He didn't have anything against killing beasts in the wild zones or inside the rift because it was normal to kill each other there, as the law of the jungle applied in these areas. However, torturing possible soul bonds and other beasts without the need to do so was simply cruel, and Jason wouldn't change his mindset only because Till told him that it was a necessary means. If that's the case, then is slavery also a necessary mean? Don't FCK with me. Jason was sure that Tilgrail was nice, but hearing what he said right changed his opinion about him slightly, and he wouldn't let anyone else change his mindset without proof. Following the others, Jason was still in his train of thoughts, trying to figure out if he was a hypocrite or if something about his mindset was wrong when he heard several thunderous roars reverberating through the whole small hall the three of them entered. From the roars alone, Jason could figure out that the Earth Dragons were furious and definitely not beasts one could label as tamed or something even remotely close to that, as he thought that it was most likely better for the big families to use sedating poison if the current ferocious and enraged roars were already in a calmed state. Gulping down his saliva, he saw Till and Seren walking ahead, with several, more than 10-meter-long brown reddish-scaled lizards shooting towards them. The wingless Earth Dragons that could also be compared to gigantic, superior lizards suddenly stopped in front of the two and only roared threatening at Till and Seren. Seeing what happened in front of him told Jason that it was probably necessary to sedate the Earth Dragons because he didn't want to see how they behaved in their normal state, as the calm state was already more than enough for him to handle. Hesitating, he had to gather all courage within him to walk towards Till and Seren, who stopped at the end of the large hall, waiting for him, as they saw Jason approaching them, as they saw something odd. If they didn't wear a gas mask, both would rub their eyes at what they saw as the two exclaimed at the same time. Huh. Chapter 288 Transmission by Hydesgrain. Jason just walked through the whole hall, with slow and careful steps. However, what caused both Till and Seren to widen their eyes was that the Earth Dragons didn't roar at him in rage, trying to intimidate him. They didn't even dare to approach him, which was even weirder when Jason's steps became firmer and steadier as he figured out that he was not in danger. Looking around, he noticed more than a dozen Peak Guardian ranked Earth Dragons staring at him as if they were confused, while their brown reddish scales shimmered lightly. Seeing that they didn't approach him, Jason couldn't help but feel weird, and staring deep into their eyes, he could see traces of both reluctance and confusion within them. When he reached the end of the hall, where Till and Seren waited for him, he perceived their confusion. However, instead of saying something, Jason only shrugged his shoulders because he was also unsure what was going on. After he noticed the dragon's gazes, it was weird because he reminded about the large pack of fox cubs and even the tornado wolf cubs that were overly friendly to him. At that time, his eyes were using up a small amount of mana, and thinking about that, Jason tried to assume several things. He had an innate amity with all kinds of beasts, which seemed illogical because he already fought several hundred beasts who wanted to tear him apart. Other than that, there was also the possibility that his eyes turned him more reliable, trustworthy, or something similar to that. This would at least explain partially why the cubs foolishly trusted him, without trying to kill or flee from him. Yet, the mature, more than 10 meters tall Peak Guardian ranked Earth Dragons were something completely different to low-ranked cubs, and Jason began to ask himself what exactly the reason for this was. He was unable to find the right answer, and only his mana eyes, which he still filled with dense and pure mana, might be able to help him find the answer. Suddenly, an extremely stupid and suicidal idea established in his head. Instead of listening to his gut feeling, which told him to disregard this idea, Jason felt the desire to test it out. While Till and Seren stood several meters away from the 3 large brown reddish Earth Dragon eggs, there were 3 matured Earth Dragons behind them, growling at the two as if they wanted to protect their eggs. Seeing this, Jason began to doubt that the unhatched Earth Dragons really accepted to become soulbonds. Nevertheless, without trying to bother about this, Jason approached the 3 eggs with the presumed Earth Dragon mothers behind, ignoring Till and Seren's tries to hold him back when he passed them. Both Till and Seren wouldn't dare to act hastily inside the Earth Dragon lair because Till was not confident in defeating more than a dozen Earth Dragons alone while protecting the 2 youths, even if the sedating poison decreased the dragon's combat prowess. Shocked about Jason's impetuous behavior, he wanted to rush towards the golden-eyed youth, when he noticed that the 3 dragon mothers stopped their aggressive growling. They only gazed at Jason, uncertain what to do, as he didn't seem to be hostile to them. Yet, when Seren, who acted impatient, wanted to move, one of the dragon mothers immediately roared out with mana amplifying her roar. Suppressed by the terrifying roar, Seren's legs began to shiver as they gave in, only to look up to see that Jason seemed to be completely unbothered by it. Was that roar only directed at me? Why? Seren felt that Jason being favored by the Earth Dragons was unfair. Seeing that his friend continued to approach them, without being stopped, he felt jealous, envious, and also anger accumulating within him. Without knowing what he did wrong or why Jason was better in the Earth Dragon's eyes, Seren could only suppress his emotions and curse inwardly. Jason, who was completely unaware of his friend's train of thoughts and complicated emotions, stood already in front of the Earth Dragon eggs. The dragon mothers didn't try to hinder him as he continued to step forward, passing the eggs, which he completely disregarded. He was not sure what he wanted to see, but one question Jason wanted to find an answer to was crystal clear in his mind. What is the connection between the lesser elemental fox cubs, the tornado wolf cubs, and the earth dragon to act so placid towards me? Before, Jason only thought that it was because the cubs' wild instincts and sense of danger were weakly developed, but this changed after he noticed the earth dragon's behavior. If I compare the three encounters with each other, is there something uniform? Halting his steps several meters in front of the largest dragon mother. Looking up, he squinted his eyes to figure out the reason for their behavior, and weirdly enough, Jason knew for sure that they wouldn't attack him because his instincts told him so. It was obvious that his current behavior was not only suspicious but also suicidal to Seren and Till. To Jason, however, it felt like he would find out something important if he were to further investigate this situation. Staring straight in each other's eyes, Jason's golden eyes shimmered brightly. He noticed that he used up a large amount of the mana which he absorbed throughout the whole trip towards the mana vein and the Earth Dragon's territory. However, instead of lamenting about this, his eyes widened as the Earth Dragon lowered its head to the ground. Its head had roughly the same height as Jason, and he gulped down his saliva as he took 2 steps forward, lifting his hand carefully. Suddenly, Till and Seren shouted out behind him, but Jason was not able to hear anything when his hand came in touch with the Earth Dragon mother's head. Without a warning, his mind was immediately flooded with foreign memories, emotions, and thoughts, causing a great headache. Stepping back in shock, the Earth Dragon lifted its head once again, and Jason didn't know what was going on, with a single thought lingering in his mind. This fucking bullshit. Turning around, he could only try to cope with the flood of emotions and new memories, as he walked back to Till and Seren, with unsteady steps, holding his head in pain. After that happened, Jason didn't speak a single word, but he could see envy in Seren's eyes, which was not something he expected. However, after thinking about it for a short moment, it was plausible. Patting his friend's shoulder was the only thing he could do while trying to arrange everything inside his mind. He was not sure if he could control the strange emotions ravaging within him if he were to say something right now, so he remained quiet. Meanwhile, Till only stared at Jason, and the decision to prevent the Drake family from forcing the youth in front of him into submission became firmer. Is that what the foreign races saw within him? He thought, shocked about the possible issues mankind might face because of Jason. Even if he didn't acknowledge it, Jason was not only someone he would call extremely talented, but he also seemed to be dangerous if anyone were to get him into their hands, whether it was mankind or a foreign race. Suddenly, goosebumps covered his whole body, and he was only glad that Jason was a good boy, which however also led him to disregard the option to kill him to prevent any further issues. Chapter 289 Choice by Hydesgrain. While Till was in his own world of thoughts, Jason led Seren towards the 3 Earth Dragon eggs. The Earth Dragon mothers meanwhile, didn't do anything against their approach, which mostly relied on Jason, as Seren's ravaging emotions slowly subsided when he was finally reminded about he was still envious of Jason, but rather than holding a grudge, Seren was now happy to have brought his friend towards the Earth Dragon territory. The last time he could only take a look at the 3 Earth Dragon eggs, and it took him already several hours to approach the eggs, even less to touch or inspect them. However, now that Jason was next to him, a few seconds were more than enough to appear in front of the Earth Dragon eggs. This was already extremely nice, and Seren looked carefully at the 3 eggs as he released faint mana fluctuations to scan the 3 eggs, when the 3 Earth Dragon mothers growled out in unison. Seeing this, he held himself back and waited patiently, as he looked at Jason, who seemed to be deep in thoughts. Jason was able to walk back and forth in front of the Earth Dragons without problems, which caused Seren to subconsciously rely on his friend. Yet, instead of doing anything to determine which out of the 3 eggs was the best for him to form a soul bond contract with, Jason looked like he was in his own world. This was exactly the case because he was still trying to understand the memories, thoughts, and emotions within himself that belonged to the Earth Dragon Mother he touched. Even if he couldn't comprehend everything, one thing was for sure. Earth dragons were able to transmit thoughts towards humans, allowing them to understand certain things better, without the need for a soul bond contract or being able to speak the same language. Jason was not sure if that ability belonged to the Earth dragons alone or if every high-ranked beast was able to do something similar, once they attained a certain degree of intelligence, or what exactly the requirements were to do something like that. The memories in his mind spanned from several centuries, even before they arrived on Argos, which shocked Jason. From what he could comprehend out of the transmitted memories and emotions, was that the Earth dragons once inhabited a different world, where their race was already persecuted and killed, which forced them to enter Argos through the rift that was appeared in front of them. After living several decades in peace, they were once again persecuted until they found humankind who they thought to be reliable, as they promised a paradise in exchange for the possibility to form a soul bond contract, as long as their offsprings were willing. Still unwillingly, they accepted, as they didn't know another way out, only to be forced to live below underground without a way out. Not only did humanity betray them, but they also used poison to weaken them and their offsprings, which passively forced the offsprings to accept a soul bond contract in order to get out of the hell mankind called paradise. From these memories and the coherent emotions, Jason felt once again disgusted, and now that he understood how the Earth dragons felt, he couldn't help but think that humanity went down the wrong path. Humanity seemed to have found the right way to achieve a high ratio of soul bond contract to new Earth dragon eggs. However, in Jason's opinion, it could have been much better. If the Earth dragons lived in a true paradise, they might not even have a hatred against humanity, which would allow the offspring to hear better stories from their parents. This could lead to an even higher number of Earth dragon eggs that were willing to accept a soul bond contract, while it might even be possible that the Earth dragons were more eager to reproduce if they were to live in a paradise, as their offspring wouldn't have to live in a poisoned lair, underground. Shaking his head, Jason began to wonder why humanity acted that way, and the only reason he could imagine was mankind's innate fear from the strong. If the Earth dragons were to rebel one time, Asterix might as well be eradicated, and it seemed like they didn't want to take this risk. It has been a long time since he questioned his own and humanity's mindset to this extent, but somehow it seemed wrong. Even if that was the case, Jason thought that he figured out why exactly the Earth dragons were not hostile towards him, even if he was not distinguishable from a common human. At least that was what he thought in the beginning, and that only foreign races saw something that allowed them to link him to the Celestia race. If he did not misinterpret the Earth dragon's memories, emotions and thoughts, his aura was special and incomparable to humans. Apparently, his aura radiated benevolence, kindness, and other emotions that established faint amity towards the Earth dragon. But that was not everything, because his eyes spread the same aura, only much denser and purer, finalizing the amity with the suffering Earth dragons who longed for a ray of hope. Jason could roughly understand all of this, and he was also in the opinion that the big families treated the Earth dragons too harshly. However, even if he wanted to, there was nothing he could do about it. If he was able to rescue the Earth dragons, what would happen afterward? They would only be hunted by other beasts, humanity, and probably even foreign races again. Nothing would change, and this was also crystal clear to the Earth dragons. He was not even sure if he wanted to help the Earth dragons, because they established a grudge against humanity, and releasing them from the underground territory was comparable to killing millions of innocent citizens. As such, Jason could only look at the Earth dragon and shake his head lightly, while trying to say, "Try to endure it longer." It was not that he was adamant in rescuing everyone, or even in damaging humanity's growth by helping the Earth dragons, but Jason just felt that the way humans handled most situations after the mana outbreak was completely wrong. If he was able to change something, even if it only meant to build a proper relationship with the Earth dragons and humans, why shouldn't he try to help? However, In order to do something like this, he would have to become much stronger, and it would be the best if he was stronger than all big families. Jason was aware that his existence as half human and half Celestia was something that shouldn't exist, and until some time ago, he felt that he belonged to the human race and that everything they did should be the only behavior he should take care of. But humanity was not alone, and in addition to an unknown number of foreign intelligence races, there were also intelligent beasts that didn't massacre everyone just like that. The tornado wolf mother inside the 4-star rift didn't kill him and only wanted to rescue her offsprings. Combining all facts, Jason was unable to say that all beasts were vicious and ferocious. If that was the case, it was impossible to say that humans were not monsters. Everything was much more complicated than he expected, and Jason knew that it would be extremely difficult to change humanity's mindset about some beasts, even if he already heard from Till that the big family has a treaty with the Dryad race which sought asylum on their island. However, from fairy tales, humanity was already more likely to establish amity with dryads rather than dragons, who were seen as ferocious and bloodthirsty. Jason was still looking into the largest earth dragon mother's eyes and felt like it understood him as it retreated 3 steps, allowing Seren to make his choice. The other earth dragons looked at it in shock, only to do the same reluctantly. Thinking that Seren belonged to Jason, who might help them sometime in the future, they accepted the youth as their offspring's possible soulbond partner. When Jason saw their behavior, he felt slightly bad, but there were more than enough problems he had to take care of for now, and couldn't just amass everything. In the end, everything had to be done one step after another, and overestimating his capabilities would lead to his death. Obviously, dead people can't help anyone, nor can they figure out what to do with peaceful beasts and mankind. Sighing deeply, Jason's mind was filled with all kinds of thoughts, and he could only lament to have followed Seren to the Earth Dragons, as his whole mindset was once again about to crumble as he said to his friend, "You can choose among the 3 eggs." Seren averted his gaze towards Jason, confused, as he whispered uncertainly, "Didn't you want to help me find the best one?" Chapter 290 Compatibility by Hydesgrain. Seeing how Seren behaved, Jason couldn't help but feel weird. Even if it was true that he wanted to support Seren in his choice, it was not as if he would pick his friend's soulbond just like that. There was also the possibility that the Earth Dragon egg with the best potential would be worse for Sero because their compatibility might be bad. In the end, the potential of a beast was just an indicator for the limits of its mana core rank, which could even be enhanced later on. Thus, Jason thought that it was more important for Seren to trust his gut feeling to choose the Earth Dragon egg he felt the most compatible with, as it might help him to build a fortified soul conjunction faster than with the eggs. In the end, this was something Shane and Malia told him when he asked them what he should pay attention to if he were to pick a new soulbond. When they answered, Jason was first a little bit astonished, but their answer seemed to be at least partially true because he already witnessed this to a certain extent by himself. He was unsure if his gut feeling helped him to pick either Artemis, Scorpio, or the Black Origin Flame, but that might be the case even if it would remain a mystery for now. To put it simply, Jason felt that he had a high compatibility with all of his soulbonds, and it might be because of this, that he was able to form a fortified soul conjunction at such a young age. As such, he just took a glance at the 3 mana eggs and noticed to his astonishment that the egg with the lowest mana fluctuations among the 3 had the highest potential, with faint dark blue strands intertwined in the thick purple color that enveloped the egg. Seeing this, Jason was about to say that the left Earth Dragon egg had the highest potential as he averted his gaze towards Seren, who looked at him with expectations after he noticed that Jason inspected the eggs with his mana eyes. To put it simply, each of the 3 Earth Dragon eggs is a suitable pick for you, and there is no need to hesitate. Remember that your gut feeling, positive and negative feelings towards one of the eggs, could help you to pick the most suitable for you. I won't tell you which one you should choose, because it is your decision and not anyone else's. You will have to live with the choice you make, for the rest of your life. Hearing this, Seren looked at him with squinted eyes, as he didn't expect his friend to lecture him. He only wanted to receive help in choosing his second soulbond and not this kind of support. Sighing deeply, he turned towards Till, who could only grin brightly from further away as the Earth Dragons didn't allow him to come closer to their eggs. You know that Jason said the same as I did before. Trust your gut feeling and you will most likely receive the best outcome. Till was glad to have brought Jason with them to the Earth Dragon territory because it made everything much easier and they didn't need to put in so much effort to even approach the eggs as it was the case before. Now that Jason also lectured Seren about his gut feeling and what his innermost emotions towards each egg told him, Till couldn't help but smile. Noticing that Till repeated the same he already did the last time they entered the Earth Dragon territory, Seren could only frown as he inwardly cursed both his master and Jason for a short while before he averted his attention towards the eggs. Inspecting all of them carefully, he was not exactly sure what he should feel or do because it was not necessary for his first soul bond which he received from his father to recuperate from his malfunctioned mana veins and nothing else. This changed now completely because he wanted to bind his first real soul bond with which he would have to fight side by side for the rest of their lives. As such, Seren slowly began to understand what the others wanted to explain to him, and he immediately disregarded the curses which still lingered in his mind. Trying to figure out what egg he should choose, more than an hour passed until he could finally feel something that Seren presumed to be the emotions his master and Jason were talking about. However, the Earth Dragon egg the emotions filled with amity came from, was the one with the weakest mana fluctuations. Looking intently at this egg, Jason couldn't refrain from smiling, as he said, "Is that your choice or does one of the other Earth Dragon eggs give you the same feeling?" Subconsciously shaking his head, both Till and Jason could tell that Seren made his choice, and even if Till felt slightly astonished that his disciple's choice was the egg with the weakest mana fluctuations, the difference was not large and wouldn't make a major difference once it matured. Having chosen his second soul bond, Seren reassured himself that it was the best choice as his gut feeling also told him so, while the amity between them was already established without the need of a soul bond contract. As such, Jason readied himself, as he approached the Earth Dragon egg he chose. The Earth Dragon mothers saw this and took the other two eggs away in order to bring them to the most secure place in their small lair while the last Earth Dragon mother remained, spending as much time with her offspring as possible. Taking out a small knife from his storage device, Seren cut his hand, while trying to ignore the Earth Dragon mother's growling before he loosened up a thread from his soul which he led through his body towards his bleeding hand. Laying his hand on top of the eggshell, sweat pearls formed on his forehead as he took a deep breath when the soul thread invaded the Earth Dragon egg. Shaking slightly, the egg didn't show any other signs and only Jason could see how the soul thread spread through the whole shell before it began to approach the being inside the egg. Only 15 minutes passed until the whole process was done, but Seren was fully drenched in his own sweat, while his face turned from a rosy red to a paper white, which alarmed Till, who approached Seren even though the dragon mother was growling. When Till reached Seren's side, he could barely look at him, before he smiled lightly, as he said, "I did it." After he muttered these words, Seren fainted as the Earth Dragon egg in front of him vanished inside a large brown reddish mana circle that appeared below it. Entering Seren's soul world, Jason began to ask himself how long it would take before the Earth Dragon would hatch, as the Earth Dragon mother next to them roared out with mana amplifying it. However, instead of an aggressive, intimidating roar, it was more like a cry in anguish and sorrow as the sheer mass of emotions within the roar infiltrated Jason, Till, and the unconscious Seren, who flinched. Suddenly, Jason felt the sadness deep within him erupting, and he subconsciously thought about his mother, while Till didn't seem to be in a better condition. Seeing this, Jason could only hear Till curse quietly. "Can't I be spared from this bullshit, at least once?" Hearing this from Till was weird to Jason because he didn't think that he was such a vulgar man, but he felt the same as the Earth Dragon mother's cry in anguish was only slightly less impactful reminiscent ceremony from the foreign races.